So we're going to begin by examining in detail, by way of introduction, one of our key textual concepts, and this one is authority. And I love to begin, approaching any big idea or concept like this by breaking a word down into its parts. Not always because that provides, the most accurate definition of the word, but actually I think there can be fresh insights that come from looking at the meaning of individual parts and then considering how that impacts the holistic meaning of the word, much like we would with a text. Actually, we kind of analyze the little parts of a word, and then sometimes that can give us a fresh overall meaning. So anyway, in any case, authority has obviously the word author in it, which we're familiar with, and has quite literal implications for the text that we're going to be looking at. So there is a level to which authority comes from the author, although we're kind of going to debate or consider an alternative view to that. Author meaning kind of the originator, the promoter of an idea, or the inventor of an idea. And then this little suffix, ity, is really the state of being something, a quality. So in short, we've this as a definition. There is also the authority of a text, but we're just going to be focusing really on the authority over a text. And what that really means is that it is the power and privilege of controlling the meaning. And that power and privilege comes from looking at who is speaking and who is influencing the message. And this is not always an individual. It could be a lot of people actually who have authority over a text and authority over the meaning. So let's kind of just go straight for the guts of this. You may be thinking, surely it's the author who has authority over the meaning. If I write something, surely I have the final say on what is the right interpretation of what I say. So I will acknowledge that authors do control a lot of a text's meaning. There is a great level of control that comes from being the person who actually writes the words. By being the author of a text, you get to actively promote certain ideas and not others. You get to make claims and assertions. You also have control over which people and which ideas you represent. So you might give voice to some people and not to others, or give voice to some particular viewpoints and not others. And you can also, as the author, leverage many techniques to create a tone of voice, so an even more nuanced version that can be quite persuasive and that's likely to be heard. But I do want to kind of question this idea that the author is the sole source of meaning in a text. I want you to imagine there is a distinction between who I am as a writer or an author of something, and as soon as that text is kind of finished, as soon as the kind of pen dries, the ink dries on the paper, there is a level to which it stands alone as an entity, that text, and is open to various interpretations. And I want you to consider that this isn't just a postmodern, there is no absolute truth wash that if you don't subscribe to that, you can just dismiss, basically. Because I think in your real life, you would agree that there are situations in which the author does not have ultimate power. For instance, imagine yourself in a scenario, someone says something in a conversation that you interpret differently to their intention. Now, there are some occasions in which you may have made a mistake in your interpretation, but there are other times in which it may have been actually their fault that the miscommunication happened. There can be some faults on the part of the communicator in creating a message that can be misconstrued. And so in some ways, your interpretation of what they said could be considered, a right interpretation, a reasonable interpretation of that, even though it wasn't the author's intent. And there is a level to which, just like words come out of our mouths and we don't always stand by them. Sometimes we say things that we regret. Sometimes we say things that aren't quite, what we meant. Have you ever had that situation where you kind of go, oh, I said that, but no, those words that I said don't quite do justice to what I really meant. So there is a fallibility about the words that we say too, and our words are not always this perfect, pure reflection of our own beliefs. When we say something, when we write something, they kind of take on a life of their own, they become their own entity, and they're open to critique, they're open to misinterpretation, and also they're open to just different interpretation of what we meant that potentially could be more correct or more reasonable than what we were even intending with our own words. And this is not a new idea. So in 1967, French essayist Roland Barthes first published his short little piece, The Death of the Author. And you may have heard that term before, the death of the author. It's quite a provocative little name for this philosophy. He published a little paper, an essay, in a literary magazine with this title, The Death of the Author. And he basically suggests that, like I've been saying, the author of the text does not and should not have the ultimate power in saying this is what the text means. He essentially says that the author does not have any special power in interpreting its meaning. So author intent is not necessarily the right interpretation of a text. So if you're kind of somebody who likes to walk around art galleries and go, I'll just read the plaque, and whatever the artist says it means, I guess that's what it means. Perhaps Roland would say, well, if you get something out of it that the artist didn't intend, that's just as valid. So continuing on, one of the reasons that he does argue that the author shouldn't be the only source of the meaning of a text is, one of the reasons he says is because the destination of the text, that is, it's being understood by someone else, being read by someone else, is more crucial to the purpose of the text than its origin. If that doesn't make any sense to you, here's another conversation example. So imagine that we are in a conversation. I'm communicating to you, I'm speaking to you, not just to self-express. By nature of the fact that we're in a conversation and I'm not just alone in my house speaking, if I'm talking to you, then in some ways you understanding me and you catching my meaning is more central to the purpose of the conversation than me speaking. So my expression of self is just one part of the conversation. You understanding my expression of self is another part. And Roland Barthes would say, arguably, it's the more important part. It's the thing that makes it a conversation more than my self-expression does. So if he's saying that the whole point of a text is to almost to communicate, not just to self-express, but to reach people, then surely the people that are, trying to be reached, for lack of a better, expression, surely they can have just as much control over the interpretation of that original text as the author. That's kind of what he's getting at. So back to authority. Remember, we're thinking about who has control over the meaning. When I'm saying control, I'm really using that as a synonym for authority. Who has authority over the meaning of something? And we're saying that it's not just the author. That's at least a postmodern understanding. Really, we're really thinking who does have authority. It's more like a spectrum of authority or a struggle between so many different meaning makers in the communication process. So there is not really one final absolute authority, although I will say, different interpretations are certainly more credible than others. There is a level to which majority rules sometimes. There is a level to which people who are well-read, who've read lots in an area, are likely to know more about the interpretation of something than others. So if you are a medical doctor and you're reading an academic paper that's designed to be read by medical doctors that features lots of medical jargon, yes, of course, like you would assume that your interpretation of that text is probably going to be better than somebody who doesn't have that medical knowledge. So different texts, they have meaning. Their meaning is not just completely determined by the author, but the meaning is certainly more determined by people who have a semblance of understanding in some area. So here are various meaning makers here. You've got, obviously on one side, if you imagine a linear relationship, and we're working left to right here, we've got the writer of the word, so the author. So that's point A, trying to get that meaning across to point B, which is the reader of the text. They're the kind of two big powerhouses that we straight away think of as people who have authority. They're the big stakeholders in this meaning making process. But then there's a few different factors that go into that. So what are the author's own contextual experiences, beliefs? What were their parents like? What was their schooling system like? What are their political affiliations? Who's their best friend? All of those things can impact them. And then there's also their active intent. So there's kind of some subconscious things that are happening there, and also some conscious things there, depending on the purpose of the text. Are they writing an essay to try and prove a point? Are they writing a story designed for children just for entertainment? Those purposes are going to affect the meaning. And then we've kind of got these middleman things, for lack of a better word, where you've got actually your distributor or publisher or whoever, like whatever the kind of vehicle is from getting the meaning from point A, author, to point B, reader. And if that's a website, then you've got to think, well, what's the website's agenda? Who owns the website? And how much power do they have to, just highlight key aspects of the text? Are they emboldening some sections? Are they cutting out some sections? That, again, affects the meaning of the text. And then we've also got the kind of broader cultural context. So, if this is a short story or if this is an essay published in a literary magazine, well, what essays are around it? What essay is published immediately before it? What was the last essay that you published? What's your reputation kind of in the sphere? Who's going to end up reading your paper? Are they going to be ultimately quite hostile to what you say or quite open to what you say? All of those factors can have an impact on how the text is read. And then finally, the reader of the text, obviously point B, we've got a similar kind of thing. So the reader's own knowledge will definitely impact their understanding of the message and their interpretation of the message. If you're reading a sci-fi novel and you've read lots and lots of sci-fi novels, your interpretation of some intertextual reference is likely going to, carry a lot more weight than somebody who is reading a sci-fi novel for the first time. They might not understand a particular reference, for instance. And then obviously your own context, experiences, beliefs interpret the way that you will read a text. So how does this relate to advertising? Well, let's just watch this quick clip and then we'll have a chat.
I suddenly realized we're all in this together.
That feels especially true given what's going on. It is good to know that our super will help us and our economy bounce back. And if you're with one of these, your super is invested in things that create jobs and keep Aussie businesses strong, delivering good long-term returns that benefit all of us. After all,
We're all in this together.
Okay, so just, I guess, a reminder that this woman here is likely a paid actor. So this isn't a reflection of her personal beliefs. She doesn't necessarily have an industry super fund. So this script was written maybe by somebody who works for Industry Super Fund, or maybe they just outsourced actually the writing of this to a marketing firm that do the kind of scripting and create the ads for them. So this script uses the word we. It says we, but neither the writer, the actor, the producer, or the receiver of this message necessarily have an industry super fund. So who is even speaking right now, I suppose, is the first question that you could ask in terms of deconstructing the messaging here and thinking about authority. I mean, there's some further questions that you can ask. So beyond who is speaking, we've got what is going on right now. The woman alluded to, especially with what's going on right now. So what is going on right now? It's a kind of vague way to potentially allude to the coronavirus pandemic. This ad did come out kind of mid last year, so that was kind of fitting. But how will this message therefore be interpreted differently in the future? Because it's sort of inviting people to just fill in the blank with whatever kind of horrible thing is going on for them at the moment with whatever's going on right now. Suddenly the Industry Super Fund is leveraging that experience to try and make it seem as though more than ever you need to belong to this company or consume this product. So how does that language invite the reader to fill in those blanks is kind of the next question you could ask. What is the power of saying we? Like, who exactly is represented by we? How is the tagline delivered? How would this change the meaning for you if you were already a Ben Lee fan? So for context to that, We're All in This Together song is written by a guy called Ben Lee. So if you are already familiar with that song and already have some associations there, how does that kind of change the meaning of this message? And I just also wanted to point out that this ad assumes that you have also already watched other industry super fund ads and therefore know what that symbol, the hand gesture that she makes, means. So there's a lot of kind of cryptic messaging going on in this ad, and it does kind of beg some questions about who is in charge of that messaging and who gets to control its meaning.